Hello and welcome to the BYU Library Family History webinar. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Olivia Tuller and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on December 1st with James Tanner. He will be giving a presentation entitled, "How do you know if your genealogy is correct?" If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Maureen Brady, who will be giving a presentation on researching religious records. Before we begin, here is a little bit about Maureen. Maureen Brady, a former school librarian and computer educator, has over 35 years' experience with family history research. She has traced her Scottish roots back to the end of the 17th century and beyond, and has also pursued Chicago and the Midwest, the Trans-Allegheny US, Quebec, Irish, and Swedish research. Maureen has made numerous presentations to Illinois and Wisconsin genealogical societies, libraries, conferences and workshops, including presenting at the 2002 National Genealogical Society Conference in the States and the 2016, 2017, and 2018 Central Florida Family History Conference. She is a member of the Genealogical Speakers Guild, as well as a life member of the Aberdeen and Northeast Scotland Family History Society, the Chicago Genealogical Society, the Ohio Genealogy Society, and the McHenry County, Illinois Genealogical Society. She is also active in the British Interest Group of Wisconsin and Illinois, the Chicago Scots Genealogical Group, and the Lake County, Illinois Genealogical Society. And if Maureen is ready, we'll turn the time over to her.
Okay, so we're going to be looking at primarily religious records in the United States and Canada, but a lot of this you can interpret into how you would be able to look it up in other countries, especially when I'm looking at the resources at Family Search and Ancestry. But let's first look at, in the United States, the pattern of religious settlement that occurred from the beginning of the colonial era to roughly the current time. So we first look at the Pilgrims and Puritans, Massachusetts Bay Colony, the Mayflower, and all of that. And the map on the left is a map of the English counties, and the ones that are dark gray and medium gray are primarily the counties that the Pilgrims and Puritans came from. So if you are tracing yourself back to the Massachusetts Bay era or even to Rhode Island, you would want to then move to these counties in England as being the most likely counties that your ancestors came from before they came to this part of the world. Like in the same manner, the Congregationalists, settled in Connecticut, and you can see they mostly came from the area around London, as they call it, the home counties. So if you are in Connecticut, New Haven, even Eastern Massachusetts, you might want to look at the home counties of England for their origins. If you were talking about Virginia, that would be the Cavaliers, as they were called, and they were all Church of England members. It was required to be a practicing member of the Church of England in order to settle in Virginia and get land and voting rights. And you can see the counties here that they came from, primarily the South and Southwest. And the dots indicate where the actual original parish names came from. So even if you know the parish name in Virginia, you can very likely tie it specifically to a parish in England. And then we have the Society of Friends, what we sometimes call the Quakers, and they came from primarily the northern third of the country of England. You can see how they are concentrated up here. And they went to the Delaware Valley, which is today Pennsylvania and Delaware. And then the last group that came early in the colonial period were the Ulster Scots, or the Scots Irish. They were Presbyterian. They came into primarily Philadelphia and then went out immediately to the back country. So you can see with these dark gray areas, this is all along the highlands of the Appalachian chain primarily, or the highlands up here in New England. This is where the Scots-Irish originally settled. All of these maps come from this book, as well as discussions of where they came from, where they settled, and so forth. It's called Albion Seed. It's by David Hackett Fisher, and I recommend it for anyone who's interested in colonial settlement and in the patterns of colonial settlement and the social mores of that time. It's a very, very interesting book with lots of illustrations. Then moving on to other than Protestant, we have the English Catholics who were, Lord Baltimore was granted a charter for the lands of Maryland, and he then was granted the rights to bring in settlers to settle on that territory, and he brought in primarily English Catholics. So the territory of Maryland between Penn's Woods over here, which were the Society of Friends and the Scots-Irish further out west, and Delaware is also the Society of Friends, and then we get into the New York, New Jersey area up here, which were Dutch. So the Catholics were kind of in between the two. And then in Penn's Woods, in addition to the Scots-Irish and the Quakers, we had the Anabaptists. William Penn granted settlement rights to anyone free of any religion. There was no specific religion required to settle in Penn's Woods. It was one of the reasons the Ulster Scots moved there, but it's also why the Anabaptists went there. And that is primarily today, we would know them as the Mennonite, the Amish, and sometimes earlier on the Dunkards, as well as several other names associated with the Anabaptist movement. And then finally, in the famine period of the late 1840s, we have a large influx of Irish Catholics to the United States. And you can see from this map, the darkest areas were the heaviest concentration of Irish Catholic settlement, Boston, New York. But even as we move on into the middle of the country, we can see here Chicago and the Illinois River and coming up to the Wisconsin. So we're looking at canals, we're looking at railroads and so forth that they would have been employed on. And you can kind of see the pattern. And you notice that it does not cross the Ohio, and very little of it crosses the Mississippi. Almost all of the Irish Catholic settlements in the United States were east of the Mississippi and north of the Ohio River, north of the Mason-Dixon line. So if you have Catholic, Irish Catholic in particular, you would want to be aware of this particular pattern. Very heavy from Boston to New York. Also the Erie Canal, that's what this big dark blob is here, and certainly around the Chicago area and the rivers and railroads that fed into that. When we're talking about some of these religions, and we're talking about the early settlement of the frontier, after the Revolution, when they moved across the Appalachian Mountains and started to settle Ohio and Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, and so forth, there wasn't actually organized churches per se, that is, organized congregations that would meet in an established building, but they did have camp meetings on the frontier, and very often this was treated as a weekend event. You'll notice in this particular drawing, everyone seems to be in their best dress and suits and so on, and multiple ministers representing multiple faiths would come and preach, and they would be in a circle around. People would camp out for the weekend. Ministers would take time on the main pulpit. They would trade off. And so you would hear all different forms of religious doctrine and belief on the same weekend. And you could hear the ones you agreed with, you could hear the ones you didn't agree with, and it might have been an opportunity for marriages and baptisms to take place. Unfortunately, the camp meeting did not generate anything in the way of permanent records, except for the diaries of the different ministers who were participating. And some of those have come down and are still in existence at various archives around the country, but they're very hard to find, and you really have to go hunting for them. And the chances of you finding the diary that would have the baptism or marriage that you are interested in is very, very slim. And then we look at Lutherans, another very large group here in the United States. And this map is from a website called U.S. Religion Censuses. And you notice between 1850 and 1870, they are very much the New York City area, southern New York, and then down along the Ohio River Valley primarily. Some scattered here in the South. There's actually some down here in Texas, but not really anyone in the majority of the territory of the United States, certainly none of them down south. Now, if we look at 2010, which was the most recent chart I could find, even then in 2010, they are primarily Midwestern congregations, some here in Southern Texas, a little bit in the New York area, but you notice it's basically Wisconsin to the Dakotas and down into Nebraska and Northern Iowa. This is the prominence of the Lutherans. So if you're looking for a Lutheran family who subsequently moved to California or Oregon or Florida or wherever, these are the states you would want to concentrate on for previous records for those families. All right, let's start taking a look at how we can get to these records. Family search, I always start with that because it is the free site that has much records on it. But we're not going to go immediately to the records. We're going to go to the research wiki first. And just in case you are not familiar with how this works, or if you've never used the wiki, on Family Search homepage, you could choose search. When that box opens up, you come all the way down and Research Wiki is the last choice in that box. And this is the search screen. It gives you a single box up here. And you can put in a territory or a state or a country, but we're talking about religions. So we are going to write Methodist. We're going to search in the Family Search Research Wiki for what does it have regarding Methodist records. And when I do that, we actually get an article in the wiki called The Methodist Church in the United States. There is another one called The Methodist Church in Canada. Now, if you need to look for Methodism in the British Isles, you are looking for Wesleyan records. They are not called Methodist, they are called Wesleyan. Same church, just a different term. But you can see here the outline of all of the information that you can access. These are not names. These are helps on how do you organize your research, what records might be available, what archives are out there, and so forth. Very good to start with these articles on whatever religion you're working on in the wiki to get a good background of what's available. It also tells us that in the wiki, you should be sure to look at these 5 national articles. So determining the church your ancestor attended, how to find it in the United States, searching by denomination or searching by state. In addition to those 5 general articles, there are articles in the wiki for all of these denominations. You can take a good look at this. There's some that you probably wouldn't even expect to find an article for, such as the Jehovah's Witnesses, smaller denominations that today very few perhaps are members of. There's Baha'i, we have Buddhist and Confucianism, we have Moravian, there is Russian Orthodox as opposed to Greek Orthodox, and so on. So it has a very wide selection of articles specific to a faith, to a denomination, to a faith tradition. And then you can get into that and get some really good background on how you research the record you need for that denomination, timeframes, archives, and so on. We're going to also look here more specifically at what's available for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the records available for that. Now, since that is actually Family Search is part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you would expect to find a lot here, and in fact, you do. So first of all, we have the background article, which gives you quite a bit of information. It gives you some links to some other articles For instance, tracing Latter-day Saint ancestors. There's even a handout that you can print out. But what I want to really look at is up here, this blue button. The blue button you're going to see on a lot of places within the wiki, and these blue buttons link you to a list of databases. So here's genealogy records pertaining to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'll click there, and now I get a rather long list that are organized by topic. So you notice there's nothing under births, but under marriages we have 2. There's nothing under deaths and divorce, but then we come down to archives and libraries, biographies, and so on. And all of these are links. They are live links that'll take you to that database so that you can do searching on it. You notice this one's a family search. This is an ebook at Family Search, which means it's a digitized book that is available, not just a database. This one is images only, so you would have to, it's alphabetical, so you would have to go and jump around to find your part of the alphabet. Here's one at BYU Library is mentioned. Here we have Ancestry, and you notice there is a $, which means that that site either is by subscription or fee, and you can go on from there. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I did want you to be aware of what this looks like. And though this is for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, this listing of databases is going to be available for all of the major faiths, at least all of the major ones. So you're going to get one for Lutheran, you're going to get one for Society of Friends, you're going to get one possibly, I know you will, for Presbyterian, certainly for Catholic, and so on. Then we're going to move on to the digitized books, and we're still in Family Search, and we are back here on our homepage, but now we're going to select the next to last topic, books. And Family Search hosts over 500,000 digital books, including family histories, maps, yearbooks. You can see the synopsis up there. Whoops, how'd that happen? There we go. Computer glitch. So there are over 500,000. You can put in a keyword in this box, or you can use advanced search. Now, these are books. They are not lists of, can be lists of names, but this is searching by title, author, or subject. You notice down here, you can put in an ancestor, but that only works if the name of the ancestor is in the title. Same with birthplace. So if you were looking for, if I wanted to find John Blair of Guilford County, North Carolina, that's the title of the book. And so I could put John Blair up here. But if I were looking for another book that had John Blair mentioned, if the title were totally different, putting John Blair would not find it. So best to go with a title, a place, or a subject, and then work from there. You can use the advanced search if you wish, but because we're talking about religions, I'm just going to put in one of the name, a faith name. In this case, I'm chosen Mennonite. And when I do that and hit my search button, it tells me that in the digital library on Family Search, there are over 25,000 articles, books, magazines, or something that have something to do with the Mennonite faith. Now, here's the downside of this library. At this point, there really isn't a good way to organize these 25,000 hits. So then you would have to go back to the advanced search and do some narrowing down, perhaps by location, or maybe even an author name or something like that. But in any case, it will show you all 25,000. You can see there are over 2,500 pages of listings of these titles. Here is a book, The Story of the Mennonites. This is a periodical. This is a periodical. Here's one called The Mennonite Canadians, which is another book, and so on. And you would be able to scroll through. And when you found one that would be of interest, you can open it up. And then eventually you can go through a couple of screens, but you can save everything, if it's public, as a PDF document to your computer or to a USB drive. Quite a huge resource. It isn't just for religions. There's family histories, there's county histories, there's all sorts of information here. But when I do Mennonites, just Mennonites, I get over 25,000 hits. That is quite a bit for one religion. And if you put in Lutheran or something like that, it'll be much larger. So those are the digital books. I quickly wanted to show you that resource because I don't think it's used enough. Now let's go to the databases themselves on Family Search, which Family Search calls historical records. So on the homepage is the very first choice, records. And here is the search window that comes up. And there are some other options, but we're going to look at the one here at the bottom, browse all collections. And you click there and it starts with, here's a list of every single database on the Family Search website in alphabetical order by country or state. And you could scroll through these if you wanted to, but you can also come up here and enter the name of a place. Now, you could do the name of a religion, but unless that faith was actually in the title of the database, you may not find it. So I find it better to put in my geographical location and then find all of the databases pertaining to, in this case, Illinois. And if you notice all the way down here at the bottom, we have two for the Archdiocese of Chicago, cemetery records and Catholic Church records. So there are two databases on Family Search for the Catholic records of the Chicago area. Now this would pertain to any state. You can do it for the countries as well, the provinces of Canada. All of these would work, and then you would just scroll through looking for records that would have some religious record in it. Now, obviously, something that has the name christenings would also have religious records in it. So be sure you are reading your titles completely to see if that the words themselves might indicate some religious records included. Even cemetery transcriptions might. The catalog is one of the best places, though, to find what you're looking for. So if you go to search catalog, and then this comes up, this is the main search screen, and it defaults to that you're going to search a place. But when we're talking about religious records, we want to search subjects. So we click that. Oops, sorry, I did this wrong. I apologize, I went ahead of myself. So here's place, and I'm going to put in Pennsylvania. So I'm looking for religious records in the state of Pennsylvania. And when I do that, here's what comes up. These are all individual subjects. You can see there are 2 newspapers, 115 titles relating to church records. We have maps of church history. We have biographies of church history, 173 titles relating to church history. All of this is something to do with the church history, the religious history of Pennsylvania. And you would have to open up each one by one, to see if any of these would be helpful. But let's take a look at just one of them. Church records, 115. This is just a portion. I'm not going to attempt to show you all 115, but I picked these to show you the variety. So here's a single baptismal record of a minister. This is his record of the baptisms that he did from 1825 to 1859. And he must be somewhat associated with Pennsylvania for it to come up on the Pennsylvania list. Then we have baptismal records of a Reverend Robert Ayres somewhere in southwestern Pennsylvania. And this is actually right after the end of the Revolution. Burial grounds in Pennsylvania, Catholic baptisms in Western Pennsylvania performed by Father Peter Helbrin. Then we have vital records, Catholic vital records of Central Pennsylvania, the pioneer days of the Methodist in Pennsylvania. And then we even have the church records of the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which today is the Community of Christ. And this is the New York, Philadelphia. Now remember, there were 115. I'm only showing you a portion of them to give you an idea of the variety that you can find in these records in the catalog at Family Search. Now, some of them will be books that are only available at Salt Lake City, And if you are not in the Salt Lake City area, you would need to see if you could find another library that you could do interlibrary loan. But a lot of this will be digital books. A lot of this will be digital microfilms. The other thing you can do in Family Search Catalog is to do it by subject. This is where I jumped ahead before, and I apologize again. So subjects, if you click there, it gives you a second field. Now I can put in Pennsylvania up here, but I'm going to avoid that. And in the subjects field, I'm going to type in Lutheran. Just pick one, whatever faith you are interested in researching. So here's Lutheran as an example. Hit my search window. And now this is just the beginning of the list. But you can see here, there's the American Lutheran Church Archives, the Augustana Evangelical Lutheran Church Clergy Biography Book. We have something called the Crow River Lutheran Church in Minnesota. Here's the Evangelical Lutheran Augustana Synod, Lutheran Church Russia, Lutheran Church Ukraine, Lutheran Church Alberta, Calgary. There's other countries and states. It'll keep going. This is only the very top of the list. But so for Lutheran, there's quite a bit of information available to find in the catalog. And then a lot of this will be either digital books, or you can find a way perhaps to get it from a interlibrary loan or on a research trip to an archive. It will always tell you where it is. If I go to another list, this would be the evangelical list. We can see here we have Church Association records, the history of the Lutheran Church in Virginia and East Tennessee, index of congregations and pastors. Here's a book, The Lutherans in America, German Lutheran and Reformed Churches in Pennsylvania. Again, you can see the variety. Some of them are definitely books, especially when there's a person as an author. But you notice this one is from Ancestry.com. So this is a database at Ancestry that you can either access through a public library, a family history center, the BYU library, or if you were a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you can get your own membership to Ancestry and access it this way. So there's many, many ways to get to Ancestry records. Cindy's List is another free site that I also feel not enough people are aware of and don't use it if they are. So this is the main beginning of her homepage, but you need to scroll down to the bottom of her page, and she has an alphabetical list here, the letters. And then you would choose the first letter of whatever topic you're looking for. So since we're talking about religious records, we would choose the R. And when I do that, it tells me all of the R topics within Cindy, but here's religion and churches. You notice there are 352 websites. So what is Cindy? Cindy has been around for over 20 years, and what she's trying to do is to identify all of the websites on the web that have international as well as United States that have some helps or information for those of us doing family history research. And she organizes them by topic and then lists them alphabetically so you can go in and find them, click on them, and then be able to get to some sites that you would not even have known about, as well as many that you are aware of. So, and for religion and churches, she updated this just 2 months ago, roughly, and there are 352 websites listed within the category of religion and churches. And again, this is not just United States and Canada. There are some international hits there as well. So if I go there, then I get this further division. Now the main topic is religion and churches, and then we have some overall general topics that we can explore, or we can come over here and choose the particular denomination and go straight to the databases that are referencing that faith. So we're not going to go through all of these, but I'm going to show you a few examples. So here is Methodist records, census, cemeteries, land, obituaries, personal taxes, and vital. So all of these in one category. So we have death and obituary notices for 11 years only from the Southern Christian Advocate, was a newspaper for the Methodist Church in the southern states. Excuse me. Here's a list of the clergy in Dundee, Scotland between 1822 and 1921, not of one single denomination, but all of the ministers within that city in that 100-year period. We have South Africa Methodist Parish Registers for 170 years. You notice it's free. Baptisms, marriages, burials. The Methodist Conference transfers, which refers to ministers. Here's a cemetery in Pennsylvania. Here's another reference to the Southern Christian Advocate. This one is only 9 years or 11 years. This is 30 years. So which one do you want to look at? Both, because one might have been missed from one of these two databases. Then we have the Wesleyan Methodist Historic Roll, Wesleyan Methodist Baptisms in Canada, and there's 11 in all. This is not all 11. So this is just Methodist and just with this subcategory. Now let's look at another one. Baptist, the same subcategory. Biblical Recorder, which is the official journal of the North Carolina Baptist State Convention. So again, this is a newspaper for well over 100 years. We have a cemetery in Richmond, some specific church congregations throughout the various parts of the country. There's 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4. This is all 6. So she doesn't have a lot in this subcategory for Baptist, but there are others to go through and to look at. And you can do that with every one of those denominations that she had listed. And I'm going to go back to that so you can see it. Every one of these denominations have links under each of these categories and other categories as well. And so there are very, very many to go through and look at, even when you're looking at something very small as the Shakers. There is still some information and databases for all of these. These are either databases or websites that will give you background information. So that's Cindy. Now let's take a look at Ancestry next. And here's the main search screen when after you've signed on for Ancestry. And if you go to search, you want to choose all collection, not all collections up here. You also want to skip all the way down to card catalog. And when you're looking for a specific topic, such as Catholic Church records or Baptist Church records or something like that, when you're looking specifically for a topic, it could also be an occupation, railroads, canals, fur traders, and so on. The best way to access those databases on Ancestry is not geographically, but by the card catalog. So you choose card catalog, and when that comes up, you have 2 options here. Now you notice that Ancestry is listing over 33,000 databases within its collection. Currently, this is as of yesterday. And you could put in the title of an actual database here, but it has to be exact. So if you were trying to find, for instance, this one here, you would have to include the diacritical marks, the punctuation, the spacing, whether or not the dash is 1 space or not. All of this would have to be exact for the card catalog to find it by a title search. So the best way to do it is to come down to keyword. And in this case, we're going to type in Quaker. And when I do my search, I now have a list, and this again is only the beginning, of various databases on Ancestry from various locations. You can see we have African American Pennsylvania. We have Indiana here. We have Great Britain's Holocaust records that the Society of Friends put together. We have published family histories and so on. Here's one also from Canada. So it includes anything that has been put online as long as it doesn't necessarily have to be United States or Canada. The problem becomes as we get out of North America and Western Europe particularly, it becomes further and further, harder and harder, I should say, to find something from other parts of the world because they're just beginning to really get into digitizing and indexing their records. And in some cases, the records were destroyed in various different conflicts. So what's there is what there's there today, but you continually check back as these are added. For instance, New Zealand right now, I know is very actively adding material. So is South Africa, and so are the Caribbean countries. So you would want to keep nothing there today, check again in a month. I would say do it about once a month. One I want to be particularly that you pay very much a close attention to if you are looking for Society Friends Quakers is this one right here. This is considered to be the major source for that type of research. It's the Encyclopedia of American Quaker Genealogy, and it is in 6 volumes, and there's an index to it on Ancestry. And when you find someone, this is the information you get. So here's an example right here. This is from the High Point Monthly Meeting Records. On page 23, we have David Emery Hamilton, the son of Samuel and Martha Moffett Hamilton, who was born, or baptized rather, 12/26/1804 in Davidson Meeting, married to Louisa H. Hamilton, daughter of David and Catherine, baptized on this date in Guilford. They were married in Guilford, and here are their 3 children, including the death date of one of them. So you get a pretty good picture of the membership record of a family from this particular meeting. And if they move around, it's one easy way to find them as they move from meeting to meeting. So I'll go back so you can see it again. It's the U.S. Encyclopedia of American Quaker Genealogy is the one that contains this type of information. Very, very useful for Quaker research. Just to give you samples of what else might be on there. Burials and funerals are very hard for us to come by, except for something like Find a Grave. But here's the record in the Lutheran records of Ancestry of the Zion Lutheran Church in Rockford, Illinois, and it's a record of their funerals from 1906. It tells us the date of burial, the name of the deceased, the date of death, where they lived, their age, and if it's a child, there's a little mark over here, and I'm not sure what that means. So we have an actual funeral list from a Lutheran church in Rockford. Another example, this is from St. John's Dutch Reformed Church in Red Hook, New York. Remember, I mentioned that New York and New Jersey were heavily Dutch. The original colonies were Dutch. So here is a transcription from their church record book. It's typed, and you can see here we have Serena Adams and Catherine Wyckoff, the wife of F.B. Thompson. Serena Adams was received into membership by confirmation and baptism on March 13th, 1835. And she was not dismissed, but they lost sight of her. They don't know what happened to her. Catherine Wyckoff became a member on this date, transferring from Brunswick, and she died in Batavia, which was a Dutch colony, and so on. So very similar to what you can get in the Quaker records. You can also find it in this case, the Dutch Reformed, the Lutheran. There are a lot of information on Ancestry. It's one of the types of records that Ancestry is actively adding to right now. And so from month to month, this increases by great, huge numbers. Always, like I said, once a month, check it. Also, a little bit of a warning, or I should say a caution. Some of these records online at Ancestry did not only indexed, but in digital format, are about people still living. This is my baptismal record from 1945. It not only gives my name, it gives my birth date, my parents' names, and my baptismal date. And this is all part of the Bethany Presbyterian Church records. Now, I'm not showing this, I'm not terribly worried about it because these is all common knowledge for me. But when you find something about someone who possibly could still be living, think about who you're going to share that with. Certainly, you're going to make it part of your records. You're going to make it part of your data. But do you share it? And I would do so very, very minimally. And perhaps even if you know the person that is that record about, you would ask them first more than anything. So I just wanted you to be aware that Ancestry, when they're doing these church records, they are not making it deceased only. So there's a lot of information there about currently living people. So let's take a look at some of the archives that are, now this is just a small sample. It is just some of the ones that I have used or that I'm familiar with and that I wanted, that I could share what I know about them. They are certainly not the only ones. Cindy's list has an excellent list of the archives for each denomination, and that would be certainly where I would look. But one of the main ones, if you're working for Swedish Lutheran Augustana Synod, the Stenson Swedish Immigration Center on the campus of Augustana College in Rock Island has a wonderful library, research library, and they have all kinds of information representing all of the church records of Sweden, the United States, and Canada. And this includes the church records of Sweden going back to the early 1700s if they exist. They also have passenger lists, both in Canada, the United States, and Sweden, the exit records of people leaving Sweden. They have Swedish newspapers, the Swedish language newspapers that were distributed around the United States and Canada, and the various Swedish lodges that were in existence in the United States and Canada. They also have those records. It's a very, very a large library crammed with records, none of which of their material is online. So you need to visit them or to hire their research help. But for instance, in the Swedish church records, the United States Augustana Lutheran, they had a card file that was an index to the church records of the United States and Canada. And I was very quickly able to find my family in the correct denomination in Rockford. So it is well worth pursuing, contacting, or going to Stenson if you have Swedish Lutheran that you're researching. If you're doing Norwegian Lutheran, the place to go is the Norwegian American Genealogical Center in Madison, Wisconsin. And again, they have a variety of material, all of it relating to Norwegian Lutheran and Norwegian Lutheran communities within the United States and Canada. You notice it includes maps, immigration lists, and so on. You would spend a lot of time here if you were working on the Norwegian Lutheran. Back to the Mennonite, a wonderful library on the campus of Goshen College in Goshen, Indiana. This is the building, and it's up here on the top floor. And these are two examples of materials just to give you a very, very infinitesimal sample of what you can find at their library. For instance, the historical sketch of Whitehead Cemetery, which is in Elkhart County, Indiana. Then there's a history of the Jacob and Barbara Zook family, a short sketch of his ancestry and the record of his lineage. It is family history books. It is congregational books. It is cemetery books. It is Mennonite missionary reports from around the world. Huge library, very, very helpful people. If you have Anabaptist faith of any sort, Mennonite, Amish, Dunkards, anything that would have been Anabaptist, this is definitely the library to look into. In addition to that, as part of the Mennonite Church USA archives, but it's actually done through the library at Goshen College, there is a website called Men Obits, and they have gone into the Mennonite newspapers and transcribed the obituaries. You can see up here, this is from Herald of Truth. And this is a very typical obituary for the time. It tells us when he died, tells us where, his age by year, month, and day, tells us what happened, how he died, gives us a little bit of how faithful he was within the gospel, tells us his father. It doesn't give their names, but says his mother's still living, he has a wife and 4 children, where the funeral services were, and so forth. This is Men Obits, very excellent source, again, for the Anabaptist faiths, if they are likely to have been putting their information into the Herald of Truth. Then we have the Society of Friends has 2 libraries that are sort of overlapping, both in Pennsylvania. The Haverford College Library primarily has information on the Philadelphia area Quaker community, and they have materials by and about Quakers, the broadsides and newspapers that the Quakers either published or read, and then the Philadelphia and Baltimore yearly meeting records. These are at Haverford College Library. And then the other one is Swarthmore College, which is the larger collection for Society of Friends. And they have the Quaker meeting records for not just the United States, but also Canada, Great Britain, and Ireland. And they also have Quaker family papers, which includes correspondence, diaries, property records, family group records, all sorts of things under that general heading. So that's at Swarthmore. So that was a very quick look of what you can do, and you can do it. I would suggest you start first with Family Search and then check Cindy to see what other options there are that are not on a main website. Then start playing around on Ancestry and its card catalog, and then start looking at the various archives that would be appropriate for your particular denomination. So with that, I'm going to go back to the general screen and wait for questions to pop up. Hopefully there will be some. One other archive that I did not put in, because I'm not sure how conducive they are for on-site visits, but the Church of the Brethren has their archive and library in Elgin, Illinois. And it is a very good library. I have used it, but that was many decades ago. And I don't know today if they are set up for on-site visits or if you have to contact them directly. And you can certainly look up Church of the Brethren archives through Google and find their website. I see 2 chats. Best way to track research. I'm not sure what you mean there, but I'll assume sort of a research log is what you're talking about. I have found there is no one way. It is very much how you keep your own records and what makes sense to you. I do it one way, but I'm a trained librarian. My niece, who is not, does it a totally different way. I would suggest at the very least, you keep it in some form of a computer record. You always include the date of your research, what you have researched, the name of the database, or the archive that you went to, or the book that you looked at, or something like that. And be very specific, not just the title, but the author, if it's a book, the publication date, and so on. And then make a note as to whether or not you found something, and if so, what did you find? And if you didn't find anything, you would want to say that, but then you would also want to include what you had looked for, the spellings you had looked for, the place you had looked for. So you would know that if something else pops up later, you didn't try that particular search, you tried a different search. And the reason I'm saying in a computer, if you save it in a document, in a word processor, for example, you can then do a find function to find any of those resources that you had previously used to see what the previous research had either found or not found. And if you find something, let's say in a newsletter or in a presentation like this tonight, and you wonder, well, have I ever checked that? well, then you could again do a find function for that title and see if it's in your list yet. And if it is, what were the comments? And if not, then you would know it would be something you would have to go and look for. Beyond that, I just make very good source documentation with my own database for my records. I use Roots Magic. There are many of them available on the market, but I make sure I source everything with comments and complete documentation. I hope that helped. One thing I did not mention, if you are going to go to a specific church, I'll just give an example. I knew that the family had moved from Wisconsin to St. Laborie, Nebraska, and they were Catholic. And according to one of the county histories that I had read, they in fact had donated the land that the church had been built upon. And I was heading out on a trip to Salt Lake City and we were driving. So they took the opportunity to stop at St. Laborie and do some research on site. But before I left, about 3 months out, I contacted the church by phone. You could do it by phone or by writing, but I contacted that individual church first to see if they were willing for me to stop by and do research on site. And then if so, to make an appointment so I could come at a time when they would be in their office and would be willing to help me if needed. And I actually did it by phone, called them, and I spoke to the priest, the pastor. It's a small congregation, so they only have one minister, and told him what I wanted to do and the dates I would be in the area for St. Laborie. And he told me that he was going to be in Germany during that period on a trip, but let him ask his secretary. So he put me on hold, went and asked his secretary, came back, and she was more than willing to meet me that day and open up the records for me so I could find the baptisms and marriages and so on. Very, very helpful. Small little town in Nebraska, but I got all the records I wanted. She was present the whole time. She showed me where the photocopier was and so on. If you're going to a cemetery, usually cemeteries are set up that you just drop in them. But cemeteries can also not want you to drop in. There's one here in the Chicago office that will only deal with written inquiries sent through the mail. So you have to do some groundwork before you start visiting churches and cemeteries and such. Cemeteries out in the rural areas that really don't have offices, certainly you can park your car and go in and examine them. But anything in an urban area, you're really probably going to find out what is the record, what is the policy for you to find the actual burial records or the interment cards or whatever they might be called at that cemetery. So just as an aside, when you're going to go somewhere and do on-site research, and it isn't just for religion, it can be on anything, do your homework first and then call ahead, write ahead, make sure that they know you're coming. Okay, I see another one. Any other hints on researching Scots-Irish from pre and during Revolutionary War? The best I can do is offer you my experience with the Scots-Irish, and I have found the references in two places for their religion and for their records. One is in the county histories of North Carolina and Virginia, which is where they were mostly living just before and during the Revolutionary War. And then after the Revolutionary War, I found articles about them, obituaries and such, in the newspapers published by the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. Most of the Scots-Irish in the immediate period of the Revolutionary War and right after settled in either Kentucky or Tennessee, Western North Carolina, today's West Virginia. And in that area, they formed the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. many, many, many congregations in that area when they finally had the money and the wherewithal to build churches, physical buildings. And then they started to publish newspapers. And I have found a lot of information in those newspapers. And I would also suggest you follow the ministers of those congregations, which again can be mentioned in the newspaper or in the county histories, because very often the minister of a particular congregation has family ties to the family that you are researching. I hope that helps. It's a tough period because of the lack of formal records for those camp meetings that were held on the frontier. So you really have to look at the later records of their life and then infer from that what you can glean. An example, I have a family in Guilford County, North Carolina, and there is a reference that they came to North Carolina, to Guilford County, with their entire church congregation, following their minister from Rockville, Maryland, which is where they originally had settled. And it was in the county history that I determined that and took that as a clue, and then followed back to Rockville, Maryland, and then found some original records there. So that's sort of how you have to do it for the Scots-Irish in immediately around the Revolutionary War and about 20 to 25 years afterwards. So anything else? Each denomination kept different records. Unfortunately, the Baptists were the worst in terms of permanent records. They really didn't keep them in the way that most other denominations did. Some denominations only kept records of baptisms and marriages and did not include anything on burials, even if there was a service in the church. Specifically, most of the Catholic churches fall into that category. Except in Canada, the French Canadian Catholic churches always kept a record of baptisms, marriages, and burials. They're one of the few Catholic record sets that I've seen that actually includes burial information on a regular basis. If you look at Lutheran, you've got to determine the synod. Were they Missouri Synod? Were they Augustana Lutheran? Were they Norwegian Lutheran? Were they Concordia? Were they Wisconsin Synod? All of those have different archives, and it's mostly geographical. So if it's Wisconsin, if there's a Lutheran congregation in Wisconsin, they probably are part of Wisconsin Synod. If they were Swedish immigrants or their first or second generation, they are probably Augustana Lutheran, and so on. But you really have to sometimes dig a little deeper than to just say they're Lutheran. Okay, two more. Handout link is now in the chat. If there's anything else. If not, thank you so much, Olivia, for inviting me. I enjoyed this. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, everyone. Wonderful Christmas as well. And wherever you are, if you're in a cold part of the United States or Canada or whatever, stay warm and safe with the snow.
Thank you, Maureen. That was a lovely presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you will join us for our next webinar, which is on December 1st with James Tanner. He will be giving a presentation entitled, "How do you know if your genealogy is correct?" A recording of this webinar will be made available next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fhl_webinars@byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.